I was born and raised in Blue Earth, Minnesota, which is a small community in southern Minnesota, and that's where I went to school till I graduated from high school. And then I went on to college, to St. John's University at Collegeville, Minnesota, which is up by St. Cloud. And when I was in or started my third year of college, I started working as a journalist for St. Cloud Times. So I worked for St. Cloud Times my junior and senior year. And then, I went to St. John's because I wanted to be a journalist. And so after I graduated, I came to Waterloo to work for the Courier.
How did you make the connection with the Courier?
Well, when it was time for me to job search towards the end of my senior year, I sent inquiries to the Fort Dodge paper. What's the name of that one?
Messenger?
I was thinking Messenger.
Yeah.
To the Waterloo Courier and to the Superior, Wisconsin paper. Those three I remember. And at least those are the three that invited me to come for interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So I interviewed at those three papers, and the Courier hired me.
Mm-hmm. Who did you interview with? Do you remember?
Probably the managing editor, and you'd given me his name.
Gene Thorne?
Yeah, that's probably who I interviewed with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why'd you want to get into journalism?
Well, that started when I was in high school. My dad was blind, and so one of the things I did as a teenager, I started reading from the paper to him. Other kids in the family did the same thing, but he was interested in columns and what columnists had to say and so on, and I would pick columnists and read from these columns to him, and political kind of columnists. And when I was 16, I believe, I wrote some columns of my own. We had a little tiny typewriter, and I wrote some political related columns, and then I could take them downstairs and read them to my dad.
Oh.
So that was the start of my journalism.
So he critiqued you a little bit?
I don't think he ever critiqued me.
Okay.
But then the priest at the church, he decided he wanted to start a letter to send to the boys from the parish who were in the military.
Oh.
So he picked me to write this letter of what was going on in the community and in the church, among the church people.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wrote 3 of those.
Wow. Would this have been during Korea? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that would be Korea.
Yeah.
Because I had a brother who was in the Korean War.
Okay.
And so my senior year, I'm thinking, what do I want to do? I've got to make a decision. And back then, it wasn't like today, where there's a lot of counseling and kids are junior year. The junior year, they're starting to look
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and deciding what they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything like that in my high school. So early that last year, I started thinking, well, what do I want to do? I want to go to college, but what do I want to do?
Yeah.
And one day my English teacher suggested that I should be a journalist, because I was good at writing papers in classes, history and journalism and English. But the key was, the deciding factor was, there were two people who wrote a column for our local paper. Their column was reprinted. They wrote 2 columns, and they were reprinted in other small town papers. and one was Susan Isley. I don't know if you ever knew that name or not. Susan in 1930, probably 1936, 35, she was named the country or small town newspaper columnist of the year.
Oh, wow.
And so she was well known as a columnist. Her column was printed in a lot of small town papers. And I knew the family. They were members of the parish. A couple of their boys were my age. They were farmers. And so her husband wrote a column, and he wrote a lot of political points of view in his column. So he was Democrat and I was Republican. Well, I wrote a letter to him critiquing one of his columns. And one Sunday, he met me outside the church and complimented me on my letter
Oh, wow.
to him. And he said something like, "You should go into journalism." So I had two recommendations, comments, one from my English teacher and one from this columnist who suggested I should go into journalism. And so that I made that decision. But I wrote that my brother Joe was at St. John's, and so I looked seriously at Gustavus, to go to Gustavus or to go to St. John's, and I wrote to St. John's asking if they had a journalism program. And I got a letter back from the head of the history department saying, no, they did not have a journalism program, but he recommended to students who wanted to go into journalism that they major in history because they'd get a lot of experience in research. Well, that made sense to me because history was my favorite subject.
Right, right.
So that's how I got into journalism.
Can you talk about your impressions of Waterloo when you first got there, and maybe preface that by your background in Blue Earth and in college, specifically as it pertains to race?
Well, yeah, my life as it pertains to race, that got my attitude and my family's attitude toward race in the United States really began for me as a child because it was present in my household. My parents raised altogether 13 children. I was right in the middle. And my father was blind, and so my mother, starting in the early 1930s, my mother was active as an individual volunteer. Individually, she helped the migrant families.
Oh.
Migrants would come through for work in the summer in the sugar beets and so on. And my mother, on her own, started helping migrants. Now, I have a picture of me. I couldn't have been more than 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, with my mother, and was standing outside this home where the migrants lived. And she took me with her when she visited a migrant family.
Yeah.
And so I grew up playing with Mexican kids. They went to our church and catechism class, and they were in my classes at school. Not a lot of them, but in fourth grade, one of my best friends was Manuel V-Bar. And first time I ever had a tortilla, a taco probably. I don't remember detail. What I remember is I was at Manuel's house after school. They lived on the edge of town, right next to a cornfield. So Manuel and we were in the cornfield playing, having fun, and it got to be supper time, and his mother must have called. So I went in the house with him, and when I went in the door that went in the kitchen, right in front of me was their wood-burning stove. And on top of it were these things.
Oh.
I didn't know a name for them, but
Mm-hmm.
they were Mexican things.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be tortillas she was making,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was my introduction to Mexican food.
Oh.
But then when I was probably, let's see, my older brother was probably 18 or 19. That would have made me 13. When I was probably 13, I remember we had a young woman from Trinidad who
Mhm.
was enrolled at nurses training in Rochester,
Mm.
and we were like her home away from home. Our
Oh.
house was when
Yeah.
she could get time off
Mm-hmm.
at Rochester.
Mhm.
She'd come to our house for a weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and she was in India of Indian ancestry, beautiful young woman, and this is an example. I just was comfortable, and it was natural for me to be with people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went to St. John's, I met people from all over the world, students from China and Negro black young man from Twin Cities, and he lived right across the hall from me. We just became friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then my first or second summer, would have been my first summer from St. John's. I was assistant foreman on a crew, be their largest crew that the Green Giant had, the Green Giant Canning Company.
Mm-hmm.
They had a canning factory in Blue Earth, and it was called a pea binder site, and where the peas were brought in after cut from the field and pitched into a huge, I'll call it a huge machine, but it was the machine that knocked the pods and knocked the peas out of the pods.
Mm-hmm.
And the crew was 18 Bahamans,
Mm-hmm.
18 men from the Bahamian Islands. And I was assistant foreman, but my job really was I was the timekeeper, and I was the guy in charge of weighing the trucks
Mm-hmm.
and recording the weight of the trucks and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the foreman was gone, and he was gone almost all the time because he was a neighboring farmer, so he spent most of his time farming.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was in charge of the site, but it was no problem because we all lived together, and we lived there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The
Until
Bahamas were black, yeah.
What?
Were the Bahamans black?
Interesting question.
Yeah,
They were of African ancestry,
yeah.
but I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
Am I talking too much?
No, you're good. That's what it's about.
Yeah, so the foreman I would be there on the site. I was there, all of us, excepting the foreman, were there 24 hours a day, 6 days or 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked from early morning until late night when it was too late for them to pick peas from the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so one morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the foreman and I slept in a cabin, and then the Bahaman workers, I think there were 4 or 5 cabins for them, and they slept in cabins. And then we all ate our meals outside next to their cabins,
Mm-hmm.
and the meals were brought out from the factory.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bahamans brought with them a cook from Bahamian Islands to prepare Bahaman food.
Huh.
And then they also prepared a meal for the foreman and me.
Mm-hmm.
And the canisters that the Bahaman foods was on, they came with a big letter B on them.
Hmm.
And the foreman and I and me, our food came in a canister, and a W was on that.
Oh,
Now I assumed that was W was for white.
yeah.
I assumed the B was for Bahamian
Mm-hmm.
because it was Bahamian food.
Mm-hmm.
So 6 o'clock in the morning, the foreman comes in to wake me up. He says, "Jim, we got a problem." I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "The men are on strike." I said, "What do you mean they're on strike? What are they on strike about?" "Well, they don't like that B on their canister." I said, "What's wrong with B?" "They say it means black." I said, No, that doesn't mean black. That means Bahamian." "No, they say it means black."
Huh.
And they don't, and they want it changed. And I said, "Well, what do they want it changed to?" "They want it changed to C for colored." And I said, "Well, tell them we'll do that." And so he went out, and they went back to work.
Wow.
So they were objecting to B because it meant black.
Yeah.
They wanted C for colored. Well, that was okay. I didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. It was more acceptable. That's interesting.
So then,
And these folks, they spoke English, but they were.
oh yeah, you know,
But Bahamas are British, so that
yeah, they spoke British English.
yeah.
Oh, and yeah, they were, you know, I use this term a lot. They were normal, just like me. They were just. Almost all of them were young men. The two that I got to know best were my age. They were 17, 18 years old. I was 19.
Mm-hmm.
They were just guys like me. They just were different color.
Yeah.
And didn't mean anything to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We all got along.
Mm-hmm.
We lived on the same place, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience for me.
So contrast all of that life experience that you had with your introduction to Waterloo.
Yeah, when my wife and I got to Waterloo,
And how long had you been married?
we'd been married. See that senior year, we'd been married 6 months, 7 months, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. When I got to Waterloo, I was aware that there was a significant black population.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I didn't know. But right away, I became aware that there was a black side of town, which was the east side, and a segregated neighborhood. And I went in to tell the people at the Courier that I was in town and get ready to start working there. And then I went out to our car,
Mm-hmm.
and I was looking. Oh, and I also, when I stopped at the Courier, was to pick up a paper so I could look at classified ads because we needed to find a place to stay,
Mm-hmm.
an apartment to stay in.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sitting in the car with my window down, looking at the classifieds, identifying apartments that we might go look at.
Mm-hmm.
And a policeman walks over to me and had noticed that I was looking at the paper, and I told him why, and he cautioned me against getting an apartment on the east side of town.
Mm.
Now, he didn't say anything about why, but I knew I knew why.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was my introduction to Waterloo.
Hmm. How did that strike you? The way the town was set up, compared to what you had experienced in Minnesota.
I don't remember that I was disturbed too much, but it was my first experience at segregation.
Mm-hmm.
My first real experience where I had, I'll call it an emotional response, was shortly after that I had to go to the courthouse to get my driver's license, an Iowa driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in to apply for the driver's license. Oh, and I should tell you too, because this is significant for me. I never liked to be called white. And that was primarily because of my background in English and writing, journalism. I'm particular about language usage, word usage,
Mm-hmm.
and I've always preferred Caucasian
Yeah.
and Negro, but
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking race,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's standard races, and Caucasian is one, and white is not. And
Yeah.
I've never, and I am not white, by the way, physically.
Yeah.
This has always bothered me because when I grew up, there was a guy in town in Blue Earth who was white.
Mm-hmm.
He was albino,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to get my driver's license, and the lady, I'm standing at the desk, and the lady hands me a little card. And on the card, after I fill in my name and so on, there's a choice. I'm to choose either a W or a C.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I knew what that meant,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I chose C for Caucasian, right? I just had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I hand the card to the lady. She looks up at me and she says, "You're not colored." And she scratches that out and she marks W on the card.
Your first act of civil disobedience.
Yeah. And then, good fortune for me when I look back on it, one of the things that Murphy assigned me to,
Ken Murphy, the
Ken
city
Murphy,
editor.
yeah.
Yeah.
was he assigned me to cover a meeting of NAACP. That's where I met Anna Mae.
Uh,
And their big issue they were working on was identification of Negroes in the paper. They wanted fair coverage of Negroes in the paper.
because the Courier at that time would identify people if they were black, right?
Yes.
Or-
And the only
Or
time they
as
ran
in-
almost always, the only time they ran stories about a Negro was if it was related to crime
Yeah.
or something bad.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be, Joe Blow, Negro.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was the big issue they had against the Courier at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And the labor union at Rath was wanting to get it changed, and Anna Mae wanted to, and she was heading up the NAACP meeting. And that's where I first ran into her, met Anna Mae, and I believed they were right, and I believed my employer, the Courier, was wrong.
So how did you reconcile that?
Hmm?
How did you reconcile that?
I started spying for the NAACP.
So
I started feeding information to Anna Mae.
oh, how did,
Because they wanted to know, well, what's going on in the management, what,
Yeah.
and I just report to them, well, they're still against this and so on.
so describe this to me. You're a young new reporter going to cover a group that's got a grievance against the paper, and you're supposed to be there to report it, but you're also still like the representative of the paper. So you're covering the story, but you're also putting yourself in a position where you're going to catch
Yeah,
some
but
hell.
you see, I haven't mentioned, you asked me earlier talk about where I came from
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah.
Well, I told you I went to St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
And at St. John's, one of the influences on me it was in addition to just being comfortable with people of other color. I grew up that way.
Mm-hmm.
But at St. John's, I was taught the Roman Catholic social teachings.
Mm.
And that was the first time I was introduced to the teachings of the Roman Church. And we'll call it, yeah, social issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, oh, and also one of my classes at St. John's was ethics. And so I gained at St. John's a real well-educated, I'll say, ethical, moral view of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it wasn't a problem at all. We'll call it an ethical issue. I'm working for the Courier, and yet I'm feeding information to a group that wants the Courier to change.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't bother me at all because I believe the issue of fair treatment to Negroes took precedence over being loyal to a newspaper that was wrong.
Mm-hmm. How did you win the trust of the NAACP? Because initially they're going to look at you as a representative of the paper, but how did that work?
I never had. I don't think I've had a problem
Mm-hmm.
with just a couple exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple moments when a black person or Negro person came to a meeting and that person was new to Waterloo,
Mm-hmm.
and they came from the South.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, in those two instances, they were very suspicious of me.
Mm-hmm.
But among the people, among the predominant number of blacks in the community who participated in meetings I went to, they had been in Waterloo a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I never felt they were suspicious of me.
Yeah.
It's like I got real closely involved with Reverend Stinson at the AME Church
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because he was the man in charge of publishing their black newspaper or Negro newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
and never felt anything but camaraderie and friendship with him.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a black lawyer involved.
Oh.
Can't remember his name, but the professional blacks accepted me. I never felt any discomfort from them or not. But it's only a couple times where the guys were new to Waterloo,
Mm-hmm.
and they came from the South,
Mm-hmm.
and I could tell they were suspicious of me.
Yeah. Yeah. But it didn't take long for the professional folks to realize where you were
Well,
coming from.
Anna Mae and I hit off just like that immediately.
Right.
And as long as I was accepted by Anna Mae, I'm sure that made an impression on the others.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
None of this bothered me because I
Yeah.
had rubbed shoulders with people of color before I got there. I
Yeah.
was comfortable with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhere in that period, late 60s, early 70s,
Yeah. Yeah.
when blacks in inner cities started rioting,
Mm-hmm.
you say, yeah, because it might have been the 60s, because 1964, up till that period of time, I would go to inner cities like Chicago and Milwaukee. I'd go in inner cities because I like in Milwaukee, I sold my reading program to a black program in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
I taught reading classes in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
I went over there quite a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd go into the black inner city area. Oh my gosh, had a reading program going in it.
Mm-hmm.
Never felt uncomfortable at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then after this rioting began, I started getting uncomfortable, and that was after 1964 because in 1964 I applied to be a lobbyist for an organization called something I can't even remember the name, but in Iowa it was an organization to get school bus rides for private school kids, for Catholic school kids.
Okay.
That was 1963, 64, 65, 66.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I had to interview with a guy in St. Louis. So I went down to St. Louis and registered at the hotel. And it was kind of late in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
getting towards early evening. So after I registered, I wanted to go out and walk a while. So I went out and I walked, just started down this main street walking,
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed, well, I was in a Negro community, but that didn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
So I did my walk and I came back to the hotel. Next morning, I called a guy that I had to meet. And he asked, well, what'd you do last evening? And I said, well, I went up for a walk. And he reacted with shock. No, you didn't walk down that street, did you? And I said, yeah. Oh, he says, that's a dangerous street.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I'm surprised you didn't get accosted. I said, no, nobody bothered me. But that was the first time I had experienced somebody saying, you had better be careful in a Negro area, in a big city.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, and I started being cautious when I was in Chicago and in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
Things changed.
Yeah. Back up to Waterloo, when the NAACP folks talked about their grievance about the paper, and you went back to report on it, did the Courier allow you to report on it, one, and two, were you able to have any impact with the management at the paper to change their policy?
Well, I always reported objectively.
Mhm.
This is what happened and so on, and I never had a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of making an impact on management at the paper, I never attempted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I never spoke to them about the issue. You know, the real the main person was what was a publisher, and I can't remember his
Bob
name.
McCoy?
What?
Robert McCoy?
Must have been him. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the one that the NAACP people were dealing with.
Okay.
And I didn't even know the man. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we probably said hi to each other once or twice, but
Yeah.
I never got involved in that.
Yeah. But you're reporting on what they're aggrieved about, so I mean,
Yeah.
he can obviously see the news because he's the publisher,
Yeah,
and went at what point?
I
if any-
came real close, within a hair of losing my job,
Oh.
and that's because, and this was on a separate issue.
Oh.
Anna Mae invited me to go to a meeting that she'd set up. There was one or two other people to go talk to the mayor about hiring the first black officer in Waterloo.
Oh.
The mayor was, you remember,
Pat Touche.
Pat Touche.
Okay.
And I knew Pat. Yeah, Pat and I always got along. So we're at the mayor's office,
Mm-hmm.
talking about this hot issue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't participate in the meeting. I was present,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew I was risking it because I wasn't there on an assignment.
Mm.
So the meeting ends, I go back to the office, and you said, Thorne, is it, who was
Yeah, the managing editor.
Manny,
Yeah.
calls me into his office. Touche had already called him
Wow.
and asked why I was at that meeting. So I said, well, I was there because it was news.
Yeah.
Well, nothing happened, but I knew it was pretty close
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
because I wasn't there for a news story. I was there because Anna Mae asked me.
Yeah. But the presence there put the little bit of heat on the administration.
You know, first thing he does, he calls and wants to know why I was there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty cheap of him too, because I knew him.
Yeah.
You know why?
He was afraid something was going to be in the paper about the meeting.
I suppose.
But you didn't write anything.
Oh no.
Just
I didn't go there in that role.
okay. So what?
But he did, you know, Touche didn't know that. I can see
Yeah.
why he probably thought, oh, I better check on this.
So how'd you leave it with Thorne then?
Oh, that never brought up, the subject never came up again.
Huh.
You know, one other time I got it from him.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with Braceville issue at all.
No.
Do you remember back then, you may not remember this, but there was no air conditioning in the newsroom.
Oh boy. And was it upstairs with no
Yeah.
windows?
Well, windows would be open,
Oh.
but it was hot
Yeah.
in the summertime.
Yeah.
Well, one summer, a new thing hits the fashion market for men. White shirts with openings in them,
Slits.
little openings all over. I don't know
Yeah.
what to call it, because that didn't last more than a year.
Okay.
But its purpose was to wear in a condition like that where you had
Yeah.
air going through.
Yeah.
So I bought one of those and put on, and was wearing it in the newsroom, and he called me in his office. He told me he didn't like that. And so I had to switch. And I said to him, well, I don't see the problem. I've got an undershirt on. Well, he didn't like it. So I had to switch.
They had a pretty strict dress policy even when I was there. Jeez. So Jim, at what point did you start writing for the Waterloo Star? How did that come about?
I don't remember. I don't remember. No, I don't remember. I had something to write. You know, I had something to write. I felt strongly about, and I had the opportunity. I just offered to do it.
I'm just wondering if there was a triggering incident that kind of where you reached an outrage point, or if Pastor Stinson had approached you, or you approached him.
No, I don't remember anything like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It had to have been the rebel in me.
What did you write about?
You know, I should have looked up those subjects. I don't remember. What I wrote about were issues on the subject of segregation, basically racial segregation, local.
Mm-hmm.
But I wrote from the standpoint of a Caucasian or white,
Mm-hmm.
because the angle of what I wrote, it was obvious that I was sharing information I was picking up from the white community.
Oh. Oh.
And that was my angle. The specific issues I don't remember, but I felt what I have to offer the Negro community or the black community who reads this paper, what I have to offer is the viewpoint of the white population,
Mm-hmm.
because they're being frank with me.
And they wouldn't be if they were talking straight on with a black person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I published my paper, I published one column that was written by my brother Joe, and we called it Behind the Behind the Grits and Gravy Curtain.
Oh, wow.
Grits and Gravy Southern. Right?
Yeah.
Behind the Grits and Gravy Curtain. My brother, maybe he wrote 2 columns for me, but he had a job in which he was traveling in the South a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to St. John's too,
Mm-hmm.
before I did.
Mm-hmm.
So he had the same conditioning I had.
Huh.
So he starts writing what's from the viewpoint of what's going on in the South.
Yeah. Yeah.
I printed that 1 or 2 of his columns in my paper.
Yeah. So when you started writing for the Star, though, you didn't write under your own name.
No, I wrote under the name Wellington Smith,
Mm-hmm.
and those were the 2 last names. They were the last names of 2 of the young Bahamans that I became friends with when I was working with them on the Peaviner.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of a name. Okay, what name do I pick? Well, I knew these 2 young guys,
Yeah.
and I thought,
Huh.
this is my name, Wellington Smith.
What was the name of the column, Jim?
Smitty, was it? Yeah, Smitty's Punches.
Okay. So you were kind of sort of passing on intel to the black community from
Yeah,
what was really being said when they weren't around.
exactly.
Yeah. Hmm. How long did you write for the Star then? And if let's make it clear, if you'd been found out that you were writing for the Star while you were working for the Courier,
Well, I'd have lost my job immediately.
yeah,
I don't know, maybe I wrote altogether between the Star and my own paper, maybe 6, 7, 8 columns.
hmm. How long did the Star last after you started writing for it, and how established had it been?
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Mhm.
I don't think it lasted any longer than the period of time that I was writing for it.
Yeah. But when it folded, there was a void there that you tried to fill with your own paper.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I got the idea for mine.
Yeah.
You know, there's a community of people that would like to be served with news from their community.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what drove me.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe it would have been financially successful if the Courier had not put the word out and told advertisers not to buy advertising in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, there's a sizable population of Negroes on the east side. And there's no doubt in my mind, for instance, that a Black's department store would have started buying advertising.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very confident they would have, and many, many other of the businesses on the east side would have purchased advertising.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't happen.
Yeah. So, but at the time you started the Progress, you had already left the Courier. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I did that towards the end of my year of teaching. I
That-
left Courier the previous summer.
Okay. This is like 57, something like that.
Yes.
And you'd had another job offer in Minnesota, didn't pan out, so you came back and taught school for a year.
Yes.
And that was at
At St. Mary's.
St. Mary's High School,
Hmm.
which was a forerunner of Columbus.
Yeah. And you mentioned Columbus. I was the publicity committee for Columbus.
Oh, really?
You know, in their fundraising drive to raise money.
To build the high school.
Yeah. Father Powers.
Yeah.
Father Powers and I were real
Really?
good. We were real.
Father Bill Powers?
Yeah, he and I were real close friends. And so when I came to Mason City, was living in Mason City, they send him here to build Newman. So I was a publicity committee for Newman too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he and I
Wow.
was friends with I was friends with lots of priests.
Yeah.
Father White, I don't know if you knew him.
Okay.
He followed Powers.
Okay.
And Father White was at Newman, and then Father White went up to be the principal at the Catholic school in Duluth, and I went up there when I was in the reading business, and I sold him my reading program up there.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, I had wonderful connections and relationships with Catholic priests and nuns. I tell people I matured from Roman Catholicism and went on, expanded in my life in terms of spiritual beliefs and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I had and still have a lot of friendships and a lot of admiration. I sold my reading program, a lot of them, to Catholic schools.
Mm-hmm.
Worked with nuns, and then I have wonderful relationships with nuns.
Mm-hmm. Although you weren't able to sell advertising for the Progress, Jim, did you get any feedback on the issues you were able to put out from readers?
I don't recall any feedback.
Yeah. And talk about your ad salesperson. Who was that?
Russ Lowe,
Yeah.
he's my neighbor.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
My wife and I lived on one side of the red line, and the red line is the line the real estate people and the banks drew as to where they would allow blacks to live
Mm-hmm.
or sell houses to.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were living there, when we moved into that little house on Boston, I think it was Boston,
Mm-hmm.
might have been Oliver. We lived on both Boston and Oliver
Mm-hmm.
at different times. But when we moved into that street, the segregation line was the street behind us. So there was a block difference. But while we were living there, they moved that line to the alley.
Hmm.
And the Lowe's moved into the house right behind our neighbor's house.
Oh.
But she had a garage in her backyard, and she had big lilac bushes, and she never ever knew that she was living next door, or she had a neighbor who was black. And this lady, the neighbor lady, she grew up in southern Illinois, and she was very prejudiced against blacks. And she would tell my wife and me, boy, if any Negroes moved next to her, she was moving. And we always chuckled to ourselves because she had a black man living across the alley from her.
What were the lows like? Was Russ teaching at that time or?
All I remember is they were young. They were
Mhm.
young at my age, and I
Mhm.
don't remember any other specifics.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, he was just, I just remember him as a young professional man.
Yeah, but you got to know him over the backyard fence,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so he went out for you to try to sell ads.
yeah.
And again, how did that go?
It didn't go well. We published 5 or 6 issues, and it was before the last issue. He came in and he said, Courier had put the word out, and you couldn't sell advertising. And I said, well, that's it. We're
Hmm.
shutting down.
Hmm. Hmm. You hadn't heard any. Did any advertisers directly tell you
No,
that? But they pretty
no,
much told Russ that.
yeah.
Hmm. So how would the Courier have gone about this? So they basically said, "What if you guys?"
My memory is the Courier offered to start cutting ad rates for them,
Oh.
and that did it.
They were kind of crushing the competition
Hmm.
before you really even basically climbed out of the womb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So you put out 5 issues, and it was over how long a period, Jim?
Well, we put it out weekly, so it would have been 5 weeks.
Yeah. And this is May, June '58.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. How'd you feel about that?
I don't recall any feeling other than disappointment. Mm.
Hmm.
I didn't have any feeling other than disappointment. I don't remember being angry.
Hmm.
Um, I tried something and it didn't work. Get on with life.
Yeah. 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 Did it? Was it disappointing also because it didn't work, but also because it was your former employer? Or did that matter?
That didn't bother me a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talk about your experience teaching at St. Mary's. Then, how did that? How did that go? And as far as your relations with, they had black students at St. Mary's. How did that go?
There weren't many blacks.
Yeah.
Um, um, it was a good experience for me. Um, and I learned that classroom teaching was not what I wanted to do.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and that might have been because, as I was the only layman or the only layperson on the teaching staff. The others were all
Oh.
nuns,
Mm-hmm.
and the nuns started using me as the enforcer,
Oh.
particularly with the freshman class.
Oh.
And the freshman class started calling me a cop.
Oh.
And there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of emotional stress being in this position
Mm-hmm.
as a young teacher, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm the guy that when the nuns can't deal with a student, I'm the guy that's supposed to be the enforcer. And the kids' attitude toward me in the freshman class especially was negative.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had another experience. Yeah, it was the attitude of just working with nuns and the attitudes that nuns had toward
Mm-hmm.
the kids. The first thing I learned when I got there, I was told what type of students they were and so on, and these are the good students. These are the ones aren't the best.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I started grading and it didn't take me very long at all. I started getting feedback from students. I was given kids C's, and they would say to me, well, I've never gotten a C before. I've always been an A student. And I quickly figured out the nuns were giving A's to the goody-goody kids,
Oh, jeez.
not based on their performance in class. And I was grading based on performance. You know, what did they actually do in their paper they wrote or whatever. That created some tension between me and the students. And
Did you see some inequity that way along racial lines?
no, there weren't that many black kids in the class, in the school.
Because the kids were so few, the black kids were so few. Did you notice how did the white kids treat the black kids? And did you have
I
to
never
intervene at
noticed
some point?
any of that, any conflict like that.
Because they all came from the same neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
They were.
This has nothing to do with racial subject at all, but the second half of the year, I proposed to the principal. I said, I want to teach a college prep class, and I think I might have been. Well, I had to have been one of the very first teachers ever to teach anywhere in the state, maybe the country, a college prep class. This was 1957,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
I said, I want to teach a college prep class.
Mm-hmm.
I want to. It's going to be a. The class is going to be reading books and writing book reviews, and I am going to grade them based on a junior, first year college scale.
Yeah.
And I had a friend was a summer intern at the Courier,
Oh.
who was a teacher at the college.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught English. He was an English teacher at the college. And I asked him for his grading formula.
Yeah.
The grading formula he used to grade papers of freshmen at the college. And so then what I proposed was I would use his grading formula to grade their papers at the senior level, and then at the end of the year I would translate those to what the grade would be at the senior level, and then I explained that to the students, and we picked the better students in the senior class who were planning to go to college.
Yeah.
And so I said to the kids, you're going to be in a college prep class. It'll be the class you would take over at the college at Cedar Falls. And you're going to be graded like you are in that class so that you can understand and see how you're going to be graded next year. And then at the end of the class, I will transform your grades into what they would be at the senior level in high school. And so it was a really good class. But one of the things I did was I made a book list. And there were A books, B books, and C books on the list. And I said to the kids, you give me a report on an A book on the A list, you automatically get an A. You pick a book on the B list, you automatically get a B. Same on the C. Force them to read the better books.
Yeah.
Well, I got a complaint from one of the parents. She complained to the principal. Well, first of all, I got a call from her daughter. Her daughter had chosen, is the book title All Quiet on the Western Front, is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
That is written by,
French author.
what?
French author, Remarque.
No, then I'm thinking of another book. No. I can't think of the title and I can't think of the author, but it was one of these, it was a book that was at a superior level for seniors in high school.
Yeah.
What put the title up in? Anyway, there was the main character in the book. It was a book. The book involved men who were in the Spanish-American or the Spanish War
Mm-hmm.
in
1898.
no 30s.
For the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah,
For whom the bell tolls, probably.
that's the one.
Hemingway.
That's the book.
Yeah.
And the main character is injured, and he's injured in the gonads.
Yeah.
So he has a sexual injury, and but he's fallen in love with a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got this problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a call from the female student, and she says, "I'm reading this book, and this is what's going on." And she said, "I don't understand this."
Oh no. Oh no.
So I had to explain to her,
Oh no.
that sexually he's been injured in a manner that affects his sexual activity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of thing you would want seniors to know about, right?
Or that they should by that
Yeah.
point.
So the mother complains to the principal that I had that book on the list.
Mm.
Well, the principal just informed me. She didn't tell me
Mm.
to remove it or anything. But I thought, this is exactly why I need to do this with these kids.
Yeah.
They're ready to go to college. It's time they read books like this.
Yeah. And the movie on the book had been out almost 20 years by then.
Yeah.
Anyway. Jim, talk about how and why you left Waterloo, and then maybe just kind of, your thoughts about it as you left Waterloo, your assessment of the whole experience.
Well, when I ended my paper, I needed income, and I was contacted by an attorney, and I don't remember his name, but the attorney wanted to get control of the Evansdale enterprise,
Mm.
and he hired me to do that. He set up a corporation to do job printing and run this paper, and actually went ahead and built the building. The building is still there. It's on the riverfront road.
Oh.
It's a brick building, a concrete brick building
Mm-hmm.
that was put up for the paper. He bought the paper. There wasn't much to it. Didn't have much circulation,
Mhm.
and he hired a couple guys to do the job printing, and I was the publisher, and then I did everything. I sold the ads, and I wrote the articles and so on. And it was my understanding that I was going to share in the profits.
Mm-hmm.
That when this became successful, I'd share in the profits. So things were going along okay, and gets to be October, middle of October, and he comes over to have coffee with me one morning, and he gets a grin on his face, and he says, I've reincorporated, and the job printing side is a separate corporation. And your side is the newspaper, and your newspaper will start paying the job printing side for getting published.
Oh boy.
There goes my share of profits, right?
Mm-hmm.
My response to him was, "You son of a bitch," and I quit. So now I'm out of a job.
And you'd already left St. Mary's by then too.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because this was October.
Yeah.
So I sent out applications to newspapers and got hired by the Globe-Gazette.
Well, and then 5 months later, you became part of history.
Is that right?
Well, February '59, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I arrived here on October 28th, I think it was. And then it would be following, February 3. I covered the Buddy Holly crash.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah. And to you, that's just basically just another spot news story in terms of.
That's all it is to me.
But it's been so. I mean, that's the one you're known for, I guess. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only story I've ever written that anybody's ever cared about afterwards. I'll give you an example, Pat. One of the stories I wrote when I was working for the Globe-Gazette, this would have been, I think, 1962. I wrote a story about the naming of Mason City.
Mm-hmm.
Because this, I was more a feature writer, both for the Courier and the Globe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had a beat and so on, but I really liked feature writing. Going out, find a story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I researched, where did this name Mason City come from? Well, it turns out Mason City was named in honor of the Masonic Order.
Oh.
Now, that's very unusual. And so I ended up writing a feature about Mason City. It's a city named in honor of the Masonic Order.
Mm.
And I put time into that.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up with the question. The question was, why? Why did this guy want to choose the Masons?
Mm-hmm.
Because the first name for the little community was Masonic Grove. It's just obvious. He was.
Oh. Yeah.
Then he moves the site to what the center of Mason City is now, and he gets it platted, and he names it. Oh, come on, what's the name? It's a Masonic term.
Oh.
Which means secret.
Yeah.
And so again, he chooses a name that's Masonic connected,
Mm-hmm.
and so I write the article,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm still left with the question, why?
Mm-hmm.
I kept that file open from 1962.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a while, I'd add something to it. I'd find something, I'd add to it. Gets to be 2020, and I'm thinking, I've got to write this story. I got to wrap this up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which I did, and it was published in the Globe-Gazette in January or February of 2021.
Wow.
Okay. Nobody gave a damn.
Really. Really.
Not one person contacted me wondering or saying that they read it. The only person who contacted me was the author of a book that was one of my sources.
Oh.
And that was the descendant of the original founder, and he had written a family history book
Mm-hmm.
in which, in his family history book, he confirms that this ancestor named the community in honor of the Masonic Order.
Hmm.
And he confirms that the two of the three original founders were Masons in what's the community in northern Illinois that's south of Madison?
Oh. There's Monroe. There's Freeport,
No, a big community there.
Rockford.
Rockford.
Yeah.
They were Masons in Rockford.
Oh.
And so it makes sense they come here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my theory in the story, because I
Mhm.
don't have any ironclad
Mm-hmm.
evidence.
Mhm.
My theory in the story is one reason, or the main reason, is when this happened in 1853,
Mm-hmm.
54,
Mm-hmm.
this was the beginning of the rush of Easterners across the Mississippi to get free land in Iowa.
Yeah.
So you've got tens of thousands of people rushing across the river to get free land.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys rush across the river to get free land, and that happens to be along the Winnebago River.
Oh.
And their interest is not to farm. Almost all these other people, their interest is to get land to farm.
Mm-hmm.
These two guys, their interest was to start a town.
Mm.
And that was happening all over. There were people who came not to farm, but to start a town, and they were going to make their money off of selling lots in their town.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys come to this location, they plat a new town, and they name it, first time they named it Masonic Road.
Mm-hmm.
Second time it's, that word's not coming to me,
Yeah.
but it's the Masonic word, secret word for secret.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my theory is they did that to get Masons from Rockford to follow them
Oh.
and buy lots in their land.
Yeah.
You know, they wanted the attorneys and the
Mm-hmm.
general store people and the doctor, the professionals who would come and buy their lots.
Yeah.
That by putting that name in their name of the town, they'd be attracting the kinds of guys who would want to buy the land and be among other Masons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's the gist of my story. But I never got any response from anybody.
This might be an overarching question, but how did your experience in Waterloo affect or shape the rest of your life, you think, Jim?
Well, I'm sure that I'm sure that my activity with anime and the NAACP and the other activists in the civil rights movement in Waterloo, I'm sure that was a big, big influence on me for the rest of my life, being just very solidly involved in the issues. Martin Luther King became maybe the major figure of influence in my life for this period that he was active. Yeah, and you see, I influenced my kids. My kids all got involved. My kids knew from a very early age how important Martin Luther King was.
Mm-hmm.
And then when John Kennedy shot and King is shot and Bobby Kennedy shot, it had a huge impact on me. See, when Martin Luther King and that movement started, and when John Kennedy got elected, I thought that racial conflict in the United States was going to come to an end. I really believed that what had started prior to that, and the things that I was working on and anime was working on, I really believed we were having an impact. I really believed this was going to change and that we were going to have a new future for America and for those of us who lived in it. And then these three men get shot,
Mm-hmm.
particularly Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
that really affected me in a very negative way. I felt despair.
Mm-hmm.
And my feelings got reignited with the election of Obama.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, hey, maybe we got a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now look at it.
Mm-hmm.
We're back. Now the truth. See, what's happening today is the truth that existed way back when I was active with Anna Mae in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
This subtle racism that existed back then, that I was writing about in my columns.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hey, you black people, this is what they're saying in them. This is what they really say behind your back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now we've passed all the laws. We've got the civil rights laws. They're all passed.
Mm-hmm.
Accommodation is passed. But nothing at the root has changed. But the truth is coming out. Now they're identifying themselves. They're white racists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not apologizing for it. This Donald Trump right wing,
Mm-hmm.
they're not apologizing for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they are warning, they are overt now in their racism because they know what's coming. And what's coming is, it's only a matter of time before the white population will be the minority in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the struggle we're in now that threatens our democracy. I mean, they tried to bring the government down, which is that now a year ago, 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
It's now public, it's overt. Now they're identifying who they are. But you still have a sizable Caucasian white population that is still subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And my granddaughter, who is African American,
Mm-hmm.
she can tell me what's really going on there. Still out there. She grew up in a Caucasian family.
Mm-hmm.
But she goes to college at Cedar Falls. She now works in Denver.
Mm-hmm. Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She has a beautiful little boy. But she experiences this subtle segregation that blacks are still experiencing. And the white population denies it.
She had some of that in Cedar Falls too.
Pardon?
She had some of that in Cedar
Sure,
Falls
in
too.
college, yeah.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And it's the root of it now. Do you want me to get on my soapbox?
You're there.
The root of it is we finally hit the core underlying issue that has been at the core of it since the very, very beginning, that motivated slavery and racism from the very beginning. And the core is white privilege. And that's what they don't want to give up. And that's what that wing of the white population doesn't want to admit. That people with light skin have privileges. And we see it again and again in this last case of black cops killing a young black man. It's infected even the black population among black police officers.
Mm-hmm.
If that young, and I can't think of his name, but you know who I'm talking about. If that young black man had had a lighter complexion, a white complexion, would they ever have done to that white driver what they did to that black driver? I can't believe it. And that says to me, almost no progress has been made in racial relations. Yeah, in the service, you've got black people working in jobs that 50 years ago they couldn't. Yeah, that's true. You got black people living in white neighborhoods that 50 years ago they couldn't. On the surface, it looks like we've made progress. In truth, I don't think what's happening is the issue is now we know what the issue is. Donald Trump has done that for us. Donald Trump has made it clear that in the area of racism, we know what the issue is, and the issue is white privilege. And you have a sizable population of white voters who, number one, won't acknowledge that they're privileged, and number two, they don't want to share their privileges with anybody else.
You got re-involved in Waterloo, some 15 years ago in a different project. Can you talk about that, Jim?
Yes, the project is the Martin Luther King Jr. Peace Walk to be put in Washington Park. And a committee of people was started in late 2008. And
how were you approached to be part of that?
Oh, Anna Mae picked me. Anna Mae Williams. Yeah, when Anna Mae called, one responded. No, but I was real happy to be involved. I told you how important Martin Luther King was to me. He was a big, strong influence on me and on my family. And that movement, that effort that he led. But anyway, yeah, so I wanted to, and I was committed. And because of my background as a journalist, and then also because of my interest in history, my major in college was history. So I think I volunteered to be the history committee.
Oh, you were the history.
I was the history committee. My title was chair of the history committee, but I think I volunteered. Yeah, because I felt real strongly that there was more to this honoring of Martin Luther King in Washington Park than just putting up a statue of Martin Luther King. I felt that this needed to be expanded, and this was this never became a big thing publicly. But I kept pushing it on the committee that this has to be part of it, and part of it is we're not honoring just Martin Luther King. We also are honoring the progress made by Negroes or blacks in Waterloo. And how? That we identify the firsts in Waterloo, the first black who did this, the first black who was an American soldier, maybe the first black who was a teacher, the first black who did this, first black who was honored for this. And I said, identify those along the walkway so that this becomes not just a monument for Martin Luther King, but this also comes as a memorial for the progress of blacks in the community. And so I started researching that, and I pressed that on the committee, and my my concept was approved by the committee, so that was on record that this was going to be part of. In addition, I also, this was to convince people that this belonged in Washington Park,
Yeah.
because there were people who didn't want it in Washington Park. Some because they didn't want it. They didn't want to honor a black on the west side.
Mm-hmm.
But some, and I think that there was a population that was influential. They wanted it on the west side, or they wanted it downtown to draw people into the downtown west side area.
Mm-hmm.
I researched the history of the park, and the park was given to the city by a Mullen family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't you have a Mullen Street?
Mullen Avenue. Yep. Charles Mullen.
And it was given to be a, forget the term, but it was to be a garden for the community.
Oh, okay.
It's got a more specific term than that. But this was,
Yeah.
it was common back in that era, the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s, but 1800s. It was common for these public spaces that became public gardens
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and public gathering places.
Yeah.
And I said, this fulfills the purpose of the donors,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that it becomes more than just some grass and trees.
Yeah.
It becomes a garden
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and a public gathering place.
Mm-hmm.
And I pushed that. And so I feel real strongly about it, and I was very disappointed that that raising the money was not pursued to do it. The city council approved it if the money was raised,
Mm-hmm.
or they approved it, the site if the money was raised.
Mm-hmm.
There was never a pursuit to raise the money of any extent, and it fizzled out in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I feel strongly people in Waterloo should just jump at the chance and start running with it again.
Mm-hmm. And the historical background behind Washington Park is that area was part of Dr. King's visit to Waterloo in 1959.
Yes. And you know, that's also in the Church Street area.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there are different reasons why it should be in Washington Park.
Because the story was, and from Anna May, was that she brought Dr. King up to meet Monsignor O'Hagan at Sacred Heart, and he said, I've got to say 8 o'clock Mass, but I can talk to you after that. And they kind of went through the neighborhood and
Yes.
read some books at the library. He said they walked into the Grout through the loading dock door. Didn't know they weren't open yet. And spent some time in Washington Park.
Yeah, it's so obvious the reasons why it should be there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, because I've been involved the history of Mason City.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a Music Man Square, which honors the Music Man movie, and I'm very active in the Historic Park Inn Hotel, which honors the last remaining hotel designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. These bring a lot of people into our community.
Mm.
We generate a lot of tourist income from people who are coming in here to see these two historic attractions that we have. Waterloo has the opportunity to honor Martin Luther King with a statue. And I mean, even now feel even more strong about it because of that that monstrosity of a statue or sculpting that was opened up just recently in, is it Boston?
Oh yeah, yeah, with the arms.
They spent, yeah, the arms.
Yeah.
They spent $10 million to create arms
Mm-hmm.
of Martin Luther King and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
For far less money, Waterloo could put up a very attractive statue of Martin Luther King, or a bust even,
Mm-hmm.
and advertise it.
Yeah.
Make it part of why people want to come to Waterloo to see this wonderful memorial
Mm-hmm.
to Martin Luther King in Iowa, of all places.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I've always felt right from the beginning, it's not just raising money and support in Waterloo. I believe there's a way, there's a market, there's a story to tell to raise money throughout all of Iowa, that this is going to be something that attracts people to the state of Iowa. Who would think that Iowa would be honoring Martin Luther King?
Mm-hmm.
Let's tell the story. Hey, let's make it public.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm 90 years old. Will be in a few months.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't something I should be getting excited about.
But you are.
Well, I could get excited if it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That's good.
I'm ready to help
Yeah.
in some manner.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool, Jim. Wow. That's a good place to stop the interview. But something you talked about earlier, you talking about the current situation and how it reflects on the work you were doing in Waterloo. You think we're in the death throes of white privilege?
No, in the death throes.
Yeah. That this is just a last gasp
Oh
reaction
no,
to
no,
what's
no.
coming?
We're headed toward more violence.
Mm.
I mean, there are way too many guns in the country now,
Yeah.
and too many people. We have too many crazy people, and we have several of them in Congress right now, talking crazy talk.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
And I don't see an easy future at all.
Yeah.
I see my great-grandchildren living in a society that's going to be very split. Now, is there any hope? I never give up hope. No, things are possible. I believe that the civil rights movement got off the tracks, and I can understand how it got off the tracks. And civil rights movement was political. We're going to change laws, and by changing laws, minority people will get their rights and so on. We got all that put in place. We even got a black man elected president.
Mm-hmm.
That's real progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it hasn't made any difference at all in terms of the underlying that I talked about, which is a sizable percentage of the white population does not want to give up their privileges. And their main privilege is, we are better than you. Our tribe is better than your tribe. How do you break that? Well, I think it's time. We've had, I'll call them emotional movements that can cause violence.
Yeah.
The latest one was the Black Lives Matter. And I understand why Black Lives Matter happened. Emotionally, the timing was just right.
Mm-hmm.
But the Black Lives Matter movement hasn't changed a thing. And my proof is this last killing of a young black man was by black officers.
Yeah.
The Black Lives Matter has not moved the needle.
Yeah.
And so, what would I do differently? Oh, did you ask? I don't know if you asked that question.
Go ahead and answer it.
I think it's time. I don't want to call it a movement. We don't need another movement. What we need is we need somehow or other there needs to be an organized effort to confront white privilege. And I mean, not a political movement. This is a movement, and I don't want to say a church movement because, a few years ago I'd say, well, the churches need to get together and start doing this and start talking to everybody about we want to live the way Jesus and other great religious figures have taught us to live.
And that's from your perspective as a lay minister with the United Church of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago, I'd say the churches have to do this. I could say years ago, I'd say, well, the churches of Waterloo can lead this effort. But the problem with that is people are leaving the churches. Mm-hmm. And the mainline churches are declining in attraction, and the young people age 45 and younger, they're dropping out of churches. So this isn't an effort to be done through churches. Mm-hmm. This is an effort needed to be done through individuals. And individuals need to confront the issue. I'm talking myself into this right now. This is a way I would do it. Mm-hmm. It just occurred to me. Individual Caucasians or white people. Do I have time to tell another story about Caucasians?
Go ahead.
I've told you about how uncomfortable I am with the word white.
Yeah, yeah.
In my reading, I was in the reading business. And a lot of my focus was putting my reading program into Indian schools, mm-hmm. or Native American schools. So I was in the Nandaree Reservation in North Dakota, western North Dakota. And one of the things I did in starting the program is I put on a teacher workshop to demonstrate to them how to teach our system. And I said, pick some third grade kids. I want third grade kids, and I'll be using a third grade book with them, and I'll demonstrate how we do our teaching. Mm-hmm. Well, in our teaching, our emphasis is not on decoding words, our emphasis is on comprehension. So we have a unique system for decoding words, but in addition, we only do that in context of the book. And then we start asking kids questions about the context to make sure they comprehend what they're reading. Now, in this school, all the students are Native American students. All the students in that school are registered in a tribe. But also in that tribe, there's a strong, has been a strong injection of European blood. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of kids who don't particularly look very Native American. Mm-hmm. So I'm now in the demonstration, I'm sitting with 3 Native American kids in the book. And the book I chose was a story that involves an Indian boy and his grandfather, and this is back in the old time West, and they've been crossing the desert, and they are hungry and they need water, and they're approaching a fort, and the fort is manned by black soldiers or Negro soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, they're called white black men. So the Indians are conversing about, the boy is conversing about with his grandfather about sneaking into the fort to get some food and water,
Mm-hmm.
and he's referring to the black white men, the white black, yeah, the black white men
Mm-hmm.
are at the fort. So they read a little passage in there, these boys do, and then I start the process of asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I say to this one little boy, what does that mean, that these are black white men? And he says, well, those are the black soldiers who, and they were called black white men because they were in the white army.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, what's the difference between black men and white men? And he said, well, black white men have black skin and white men have white skin. I said, okay. I said, you're an Indian, aren't you? He said, yes. I said, what color skin do Indians have? And he said, brown skin. I rolled up my sleeve like this, and his arm was open.
Mm-hmm.
I laid my arm down next to his.
Mm-hmm.
He was a registered member of the tribe, so he was a Native American tribally. His skin color was lighter than mine.
Mm-hmm.
I laid my arm next to his, and I said, well, now I'm a white man, and you're an Indian boy. Your skin color isn't brown. How do you tell the difference between Indians and white men? He says to me, Indians are smarter. The point is that I'm a perfect example why I dislike this term Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
It's meaningless. White. White is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
We have all kinds of skin color.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have this Caucasian European ancestry population that is privileged, and it's called white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer to that is, one-on-one, we Caucasians or we white people have to acknowledge our privileges. And that occurred for me after that crime that started the Black Lives Matter movement, or
Yes.
what, I forget the names of the name of the guy that
George
was,
Floyd.
yeah, that one.
Yeah.
When that happened, I had a conversation with myself, and my conversation went like this. When I was involved in Waterloo with anime and NACP, occasionally I would hear, it wasn't directed specifically at me, but it was directed occasionally at some other whites who were involved.
Mm-hmm.
That, well, that person is prejudiced. But I was never confronted directly. You had asked a question, how was I accepted maybe back
Yeah.
then?
Yeah.
I was never directly asked
Mhm.
or said about me that I was prejudiced.
Challenged. Yeah.
But that was on my mind, and I was prepared to answer that I was not. that if I was ever confronted, I was not prejudiced.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started examining myself now after that George Floyd incident, I reaffirmed to myself I was not prejudiced. I've never been prejudiced against people because of the color of their skin. I have been prejudiced based on gender. Back in that day and age, up until about 1970, I was a male chauvinist pig. But almost all men were male chauvinist pigs.
Mm.
And I have acknowledged I was a male chauvinist pig. It changed for me. One day I was sitting at my table, and by then my wife and I had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. It was like 1970, 71 when what was that called?
Equal Rights Amendment?
No, the rights for women.
Equal Rights
Equal
Amendment.
Rights Amendment. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was when the Equal Rights Amendment was going on, and this was being
Mm-hmm.
talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting at the table at home, and I'm thinking about that issue. Where am I on that issue?
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what answer was? I want the same opportunities for my daughters as I want for my sons.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when I changed my mind about the equality of the sexes.
Mm-hmm.
So in my talking with myself about this after the Floyd thing and Black Lives Matter, so I acknowledge I'm not prejudiced based on color of skin. I'm not prejudiced based on race. I'm no longer prejudiced based on men are better than women. What am I? And for the first time in my life, I acknowledged that I was privileged. I'd never confronted myself with that question. I'm privileged. I can drive anywhere and no cop is going to assault me simply because I'm white.
Mm-hmm.
I can be stopped by a cop anywhere and they will respect me. They will treat me with respect unless it's obvious I'm a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they've got the license plate number that they're stopping some guy that's wanted for murder,
Mm-hmm.
they may not treat me with the respect I'd want. But generally speaking, if they're stopping me for a traffic thing, like they did this young boy, they claim they stopped him because he was what? He didn't stop, or he turned the corner when he shouldn't, or something.
Mm-hmm.
If they stop me for just a minor violation, I'm going to be treated with respect. If my skin color is dark, I have a risk, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the difference. I am privileged, and suddenly, for the first time in my life, I'm 88, 89 years old when this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I acknowledged. It's so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I have privileges that black people don't have.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we don't need a move. We don't want a movement. Movement says emotion. This can get violent, or we're pressing for something. No, we need a. Do you have a better word?
Well, sounds like people need to have a little personal epiphany about.
We need conversation. Or we need efforts being made to confront, and it's truly confront, people with light skin, the white people. Just confront honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the rule we live by.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Do Unto Others, You Have Them Do Unto You.
You think telling history projects like this, like your Peace Walk, like what we're doing, does that help? Does that
What?
by retelling the history and telling it accurately, does that advance that understanding?
Yes. And that's the opportunity to, because of my history background, it's hard for me to believe that anybody in the United States of America, especially the governor of a state, and I'm thinking the governor of Florida, who would be putting on a campaign to restrict the dissemination of knowledge. That's all we're talking about. When we raised our children, my wife and I, we didn't hide anything from our kids. We put all kinds of books on the wall, and we encouraged our kids to read any book they wanted to. I never questioned any book my children brought home because I believed in the importance of reading. I mean, this is the United States of America. Mm-hmm. We have this long history of wonderful education. We should be encouraging our children to read on their computers now, of course, but to read anything and everything. Mm-hmm. How do you get educated if you don't broaden your mind by reading? Now I'm getting excited again. But this makes me think, this takes me back to the Martin Luther King Memorial Project that I started to talk about. I was the history chair of the history committee, mm-hmm. and then I was proposing that the walk include not just honoring Martin Luther King, but honoring the first accomplishments of different things of blacks in Waterloo. Mm-hmm. Part of that, and I included it in my proposal to the committee, that this be done in conjunction with getting high school students involved in researching this history. Mm. Now, I personally spent time at the library. I went to Waterloo and spent an evening in the library doing research myself. Mm-hmm. And I had contacted two students, two white students to be with me, and we did some researching in the library. Mm-hmm. But my proposal was that to do this, that we have kids in the high school do the researching to identify who are these blacks we're going to recognize. And this is our historic source. And that then that research would be confirmed by, say, professionals in the school system who could check it all out and make sure it's all accurate. But mm-hmm. get some high school students involved in doing the research. Mm-hmm. This is another reason that ties in with your question here, the educational side. Yes, we should be educating the public. Yeah. We shouldn't be hiding this. Let's talk about the privileges mm-hmm. that whites have inherited from centuries. Yeah. I'll give you an example of this kind of a privilege. This is the first time I learned it when I was probably 11. I've told you about Bahamian workers coming up to mm-hmm. Work in the factory in Blue Earth. Mm-hmm. So let's say I was 11 years old. Back during the wartime, that Second World War, they brought up Jamaicans. Mm. And so during the war, and then that's how the Bahamians got into it after the war. They had started bringing up foreign workers during the Second World War, but they were Jamaicans. Mm-hmm. And this particular summer day, it was a beautiful summer day, I'm across the street helping the neighbor lady with her lawn and her flowers. And I was very, very proud of doing this. Mm-hmm. I was proud of the beauty of her flowers and being involved in helping the neighbor lady put flowers out and so on. And around the corner come some Jamaicans, and they're walking in the street around the corner, and they come past the lot, and they stop, and they are admiring my flowers. And so I go up to them, and I start a conversation. And then I ask a question. Why are you guys walking in the street? And the guy I'm talking to, he says, we come up to work here from the south. He says, we start in Florida and we work the fields, whatever the crop is. And this is the first time this is explained to me, that this is why they're in Blue Earth, Minnesota to work on peas. He says, we start in the south. And he says, when we come into the United States, one of the things we're told is, don't walk on the sidewalks. The white people don't want you to do that. And if you're walking on the sidewalk, they'll tell you to walk in the street. So that's why we're walking in the street. And I said to him, you don't have to do that here.
Yeah.
You can walk on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
What was my privilege?
Walking
In their minds,
Yeah.
my privilege was I could walk on the sidewalks. In their mind, they didn't have the privilege to walk on sidewalks. Can you believe that?